I did a little research and I found these interesting things that some kids answered a question. The question was, what do most people do on a date? And Martin, age 10, said, well, on the first date, they just tell each other lies. And that usually gets them interested enough to go on a second date. Then they ask, well, when is it okay to kiss someone? Well, Pam had it figured out, age 7. She said, if they're rich. And then the question was asked, how would you make a marriage work? Ricky, age 10, said, I get tickled when I do this one, so y'all got to hold in there with me. Tell your wife she looks pretty, even though she looks like a dump truck. Wise kid. Wise kid. I don't think I would have used those words, but out of the mouth of babes, you know. Most of us have moments when we look really rough. We're using a scripture to springboard in this series, and it comes from the Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 15. And here's what it... Now, if you're here and you've not been through any of the other 3 sermons, don't worry about it, okay? I'll bring you up to snuff here in a minute. And some of you don't have a clue what I just said. Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards. The idea is that Solomon and his lover, the woman that he's fallen in love with, is going to be his wife. They look at their relationship like a love vineyard, like a grape vineyard, but they call it a love vineyard. So they are begging, catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom. The idea is that when spring comes, or whenever it is, when grapes start to get ripe, they have a bloom on the vine first, and then the grapes appear. And little foxes will get in and eat those blossoms and therefore destroy the vineyard. So we've been talking about little foxes, those things, those little things that mount up between spouses or can mount up between anybody in a relationship. The little things that aren't dealt with. When I opened this series, I preached about how we should catch them and we should kill them. We should destroy the little foxes and get them out of our love vineyards. If we don't, then the bloom of our love is going to be destroyed. Then Frank preached, and he talked about communication, and he talked about how the fact that words are very important in a relationship. And then Chris, last week, if you were here and if you were not, he talked about the traps that we can get in relationships. So today I'm going to try and wrap all of this up and talk about the vineyard can still bloom. There can still be love, and that love can grow even after there are little foxes that have gotten into the love vineyard. Do you remember the Bee Gees song, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart? How can you stop the rain from falling down? Well, I want to answer that this morning. I want to give you some good answers from the Scriptures. In fact, Jesus says this in Matthew, and it's recorded in Matthew 19. With man, this is impossible. Did you hear me? If you're trying to work out your love vineyard on your own, without God, you're in trouble. Because with man, it's impossible. But with God, Jesus goes on to say, all things are what? Possible. That means that if I'm going to try and get the little foxes out of my vineyard and God is not involved in my decisions and in that entire process, then I'm in trouble. And I will say this, the Bible teaches, Jesus even said it, please don't be unequally yoked. I don't know if you understand what that means. Don't know if you've ever read it. What that means is, don't fall in love with somebody that is not in love with Jesus. Wow, that hits us right between the eyes, doesn't it? See, God gave us marriage. Jesus died for each one of us so that we could go to heaven. But He died so that we could live not only in marriage, but with everyone else in relationships. He teaches us how we should treat each other. And if you leave God and Jesus out of the equation of marriage, you are in trouble. The inventor has told us what to do. The Creator has given us the guidelines. In our culture, you know, one of our biggest heartaches in ministry? We're told that it's already happened in our culture, but in the next 5 to 10 years, no one will be getting married much. They'll just be living together. Now see, you think that's pretty common for a 17, 18, 19, 20-something year old, but I will promise you that it goes all the way through the spectrum. There's a lot of older people doing it too. So right away, we start out in our love vineyard thinking that we could go against what God has told us about our relationship in marriage. And then we wonder, how can we stop the rain from falling down? If we leave God and Jesus out of the equation, we're in trouble. With God, all things are possible. So I want to start right here. I want to start with you. If you don't give you to God, if you're not in love with Jesus as an individual, you're going to have a hard time loving a spouse like they should be loved. It begins with a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. If you're sitting in this room today and you're thinking about getting married, you're not married, you're living together, I want to tell you something. You're not honoring Jesus if you're doing those things. So your relationship with Jesus matters on how you're going to be married. And if you're the person that, you know, we see people and we base it on the outward person rather than on the inward person. And I said this in my first sermon in this series. I am so in love with him. He is so good looking. But does he love Jesus? If he doesn't love Jesus and you are a Jesus person, if she doesn't love Jesus and she's a Jesus person, you get it? We start out saying, oh well, we'll just try it and see what happens. We got to get ourselves ready to treat each other like we should. I read this week. Success in marriage does not come merely through finding the right mate, but through being the right mate. See, we look for Mr. or Ms. Right. We want that person that's perfect in every way. When we should be looking for somebody, like I said, I'll say it again, who loves Jesus and understands what that's all about. In the first conversation, that should be something that comes up. Are you a disciple of Jesus? Well, I don't know about that church stuff, but I don't know about you. I'll see you later. You're nice looking and you're, but go away. Now, we don't do that, and we probably won't do that, but it would be nice. Several years ago, the unity candle was entered into marriage ceremonies. We used to not have these kind of things. You had the reception, you had nuts and mints and some punch and cake. That was it. You didn't do much. If you did anything special as Christians, you took the Lord's Supper together. The unity candle's old now. I've had folks tie ropes, which was a beautiful ceremony. I've had people do the sand sculptures, and all that was born out of the unity candle. So what happens? The mom from the bride, I just knew this thing probably wouldn't strike and I'd be lost. The bride's candle's lit and the groom's candle's lit, and then at some point in the ceremony, the bride and the groom come up and they light the unity candle together. Now, y'all understand, I didn't go out and buy a brand new unity candle. I used candles I found around my house. That's a little cheap, but I did it. Here's the thing. You start with you. Are you right with Jesus? You start with you. Are you right with Jesus? Are you a follower or are you just a believer? And then you take those two people, then, they are ready to form this union, which is called the unity candle. And it's a gorgeous ceremony, and it speaks highly. Now, when we first started doing it, we would blow out these two candles after that one was lit. Well, it made a smoky mess for the bride and the groom. Sometimes it got in their eyes. That was a practical reason not to do it that way. But when I first started doing it, I thought about it long and hard. And I talked to the bride, the first bride and groom that I introduced this idea. I said, I don't want y'all to blow these out because you do not cease to be individuals. You still are individuals with individual qualities, but you are taking those two people and blending them into one person here. So don't blow out the candles. You know, we don't kill you off after you do this. But you do kill off your selfishness, because what happens is when one of these gets in front of the unity candle, because they want their way in the marriage. And then this one says, well, if you want your way, I want my way. Now you got an argument, and this one wants to get in front of that one. I'm running out of table, so I got to keep doing this. And pretty soon the argument is that we can't get along, so our unity is destroyed. So the unity candle is no longer any good. It doesn't stand for anything because we've gotten in front of it. I love this quote. Somebody said marriage is where two people are singing a duet and a solo at the same time. Two people singing a duet and a solo at the same time. So we have to fix ourselves. We start with us. In Matthew 7, Jesus reminds us, why in the world are you trying to get a speck out of your spouse's eye when you've got a big plank or a big log sticking out of your own eye? What do we want to do most of all in relationships? Well, it can't be me. I want to fix you. You're the one that has the problem. I don't have a problem. I am doing just what I'm supposed to. Then the argument starts, at least in people's heads. So we get in this situation to where we're transferring fault to the other person. Paul says you've got to have a heart for God. In Ephesians 4:30, which is, by the way, right before Ephesians 5, which talks about marriage in particular, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, Paul writes, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. If you are baptized into Christ, you have received the gift of the Holy Spirit to live in you. And when you go against what Jesus would do in a relationship, if you don't treat that person like Jesus would treat them, you are grieving the Holy Spirit Himself. And He is the one that seals us for eternity. That's what Paul's getting at. We have to get rid of the little fox of bitterness and the little fox of unforgiveness. And we've got to replace it with the love of Jesus that we have in our own hearts. In 32 of that same chapter 4 of Ephesians, he says, be kind and be compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ in God, what? Has forgiven you. So if we in our relationships get in trouble, and Paul writes in another place, it's okay to be angry. If you get angry at your spouse, don't sin. It's okay to be angry. You're going to get angry over things. Just don't sin in your anger. And you say, well, how can I not act like Jesus? Love and compassion. This person's not somebody that you made a vow to fight with. You made a vow to be with. And we allow the little foxes of life just to get in and destroy the bloom of our love. And it can happen in a heartbeat, y'all. We have to add to our eros love, which is erotic or romantic love. We have to add agape love to it, which is unconditional. We can't just say, well, I love you if. If you are intimate with me, I love you. If you do this or do that, I love you. I remember what Roger Knight told me from India years ago. He said, Webby, we get married and then we fall in love. And they do. Both families do a background check. How many of us could pass that? They don't let their young people get married until the background check has been decided. If there's anything in one of those families that could come back in the genes of those two people, they don't get married. The parents say, no way. So it's not based on attraction, and it's not based on anything, but they believe in the institution of marriage, so they get married. And then he said, we fall in love with each other. And their divorce rate is not 50-50, I promise you. It's almost not. That's the first thing. Deal with you. Get you and Jesus on the same page. Second thing is the 3 T's. Time, talk, and touch. Let's talk about time a little bit. It's about getting our priorities in order. It's about love being in action. It's saying, I love you and I care for you and I adore you and you are the one. But it's more than conversation hearts at Valentine's. What? Be mine. I'm yours. How many relationships started with conversation hearts in grammar school? Our time together cannot be constant leftovers. We need to take the time to prepare a fresh, very appetizing meal together. You know, warmed over food's good, and some of it can taste great, but you don't want to do it all the time, do you? Particularly when it comes to love, you don't want to warm up your love. Now, I don't agree with that old statement. Say, well, we don't spend quantity time, but every time we can get together, we spend quality time. I don't buy that at all. I believe when you say we spend quantity time, but we spend quality time, but we don't spend a lot of time together, I think you're just bluffing. I think you don't want to deal with the fact that you need to be spending more good time together. Look, time, and it's so important, and it ties right in with the next one, which is talk. Time and talk. Listen to what Lynette, age 8, said. Dates are for having fun, and people should use them to get to know each other. Even boys have something to say if you listen long enough. You see, men, we don't like to talk about deep stuff, do we? I don't know about you. I probably would rather have a root canal. I'm serious. It's hard to talk about deep stuff. And many of us men, we just don't let our guards down. We want to be tough and we want to be in control. And so we don't put our guards down much for any kind of a deep talk. Colossians says, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. See, your spouse is an everyone. And if you want to know how to talk to your spouse, then let your conversation be full of grace. It can't just be a grunt, guys. It can't be just a little passing remark. And I know all of us aren't blessed with the gift of gab. But when it comes to this, we must be willing to talk. We've got to take the time to deal with the little foxes that we have determined are in our relationship. Communication is so important. And it's not small talk, it's deep talk, it's honest talk, it's positive talk about negative things. It's building up the other person because we're Christians first, remember? So what I want to do with the talk is not to attack, but to encourage my spouse. I want to say it in a way where it's full of grace, like Paul writes. And when I do that, then I know how to talk to everyone, not just the people outside of my marriage, but I know how to talk to my wife. That's so fundamental to getting along with each other. You know, too often we treat marriage in our culture like I do my golf game sometimes. I've got 2 putters down here. This one was given to me for Christmas in 2001 by a friend. She gave me one and her son one. It's got my name on it. And it's even spelled right. And it's a glass. It's a Zimmerman glass putter. I don't know if you knew they make those. But it works just fine. You can putt with it. But you know how golfers are? If your putting starts to get bad, the first thing you want to do, I need a new putter. So I pulled the cover off of this one, and it's ceramic. I don't know how I ended up with 2 glass kind of putters, but I did. And I will use that for a little while, but then in a little while, my putting will get bad again. You know what we never understand? It's not the putter. It's us. And too often in our marriages, in our culture, we just want to get another spouse. And what we find out is it's not the spouse, it's me. So, we must spend time communicating and talking in a way that gets the issues out. I read this article by a lady that writes, and she's not really a Christian, but she writes this article about how she loves marriage, and she's been married 11 years when she wrote this article, and she says, you know, we made vows in front of our family, in front of God and friends, and she said, why would we go to all that trouble of a wedding if we were not going to stay together? That's very practical from somebody that's not looking at it in a religious way. She says, I believed in marriage. I believed then marriage was a lifetime commitment. And the divorce, or the D word, was not an option for us. Oh, we've had bad times, she writes. The D word was uttered from our lips at each other more than once. And we would heap insults on each other. And she said, I even found myself in a heap down in the middle of the foyer of our house, squalling and crying because I had just lost a late-term child, our first baby. And I couldn't understand how I would ever make it, or we would ever make it in our relationship after that tragedy happened. I did not know how we would go on. But she says, we've weathered many storms. We now have 4 children. She says, we've had job issues where I worked at night, he worked during the day, and it was very difficult. She said, we ate a lot of microwave food. She said, we cried, and we've driven away, and We've gone and gotten a motel room and spent the night. We slept on the couch. She said, we've been through all of this stuff. And she says, you can exhale knowing that you will not split up, only sticking together through it all. And she finishes it by saying, what we've built is so strong, the bad times don't have a chance to topple our foundation. She said they couldn't get any worse than they've been in the past. And here's what she says. But that's something you promise to deal with together when you say, I do. You see, that bond of the covenant marriage was stronger than the difficulties that they went through. So how do we touch? We take time. We take time to talk. And we need to take time to touch and talk. All 3 of them fit together. Very quickly, I want to talk about public touch. Physical touch is a human need. In fact, I can prove it. Physical touch in a marriage is an important tool for strengthening bonds. When couples touch in affectionate or positive ways, they increase their production of oxytocin. This hormone is a key player in establishing and maintaining bonds between people. When you and your spouse touch, you are taking a tiny step to increase the strength of your relationship. We're talking about public touch here. In 2010, a research firm did a study on the NBA, National Basketball Association, and they tracked every bump and every hug and every high five in a single game played by each team that they studied. And here's what they found. The good teams tended to have more touches than the bad ones. The league's top two teams were the most touch-bonded teams, the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers. And the last thing they found out was the least touchy teams were the Sacramento Kings and the Charlotte Bobcats, neither of which had good seasons. Touch matters. The human touch. There's something that happens in our physiology when we touch each other. Here's the other thing about public touch. What are we teaching our young? If a mom and dad never hug or kiss in front of their children, what are they saying? Y'all, we got to act at least like we like each other. Right? I mean, that's just kind of normal. But if our parents never hug each other in front of the kids or the grandkids, they never show any affection and touch. I'm talking about public touch. See, it's very, very important. This public touch is vital to your relationship. Listen, it's everyday touch. It's what you model to the young. Express your love with touch. A hug. Hold hands. Let them see you like each other and you love each other. Men, the best thing you could do for the young around you is to open doors for your wife. Get out of the car and walk around and open the doors. Ladies, the best thing you could do is to sit there until he does it. Now, you may have to get out of the car an hour later and get in the house by yourself. But Joyce has learned that I'm going to open doors for her. I will not let me go in a building before she goes in a building. Ladies do not like it, guys, when they have to trail us when we walk. We go on up ahead because we're go get it done. And there's our wife trying to catch up with us. What does that say to people around us? It's disrespectful. So we should respect each other, and that's what it boils down to. Ladies, you expect when we sit down to watch a movie that we'll put our arms around you. What about you putting your arm around us for a while? Right, guys? How about you reach out and just put your hand on our knee? Why don't you just take us by the hand? You see, men like touch too, but be careful. I knew y'all were thinking this. Because see, when a lady touches a man, he thinks there's more going to happen. I know. And that's because we're wired that way. It takes us at least 2 seconds, and you women, it takes an hour and a half or two. So here's what you got to do. Guys, a little tip. Talk before you touch privately. That will do more to prepare your wife for what's going to take place than anything else you could do. Just talk to her. Talk to her and listen to her. I promise you, it works. Intimacy is vital. This is scripturally what God meant here. It's a physical intimacy. You become one, flesh. Genesis, 2nd chapter. So you can't ignore this part of your marriage. Let me read you something that Paul wrote. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you. There's a lot of reasons to have a deep and lasting and frequent private touch. It's scriptural and it will matter in your relationship more than most any other thing. And so we have to be biblical in how we approach our marriages. If we're not, then it's just a contract. It's not a covenant. Never, never. If you hadn't heard anything else about private touch, listen to this. Your private touch should always stay private. Always. If it's not good, don't talk about it with the girls. If it's not good, don't talk about it with the guys. That is something you should never do. That's why I call it private. It's between you and your spouse. But too often we drag all of that before. And, oh, be careful of Facebook, please. Oh, my goodness. How many times do I read from Christians, because I know them, running their spouse down on Facebook? What in the world is that about? Deal with the little foxes. Deal with it scripturally. Get them out of your relationship. Don't bring your private life into the world. If you need help, there's people that can help you. There can be neutral parties that can get involved. But I want to promise you something. Making it all public is not the way to go about it. I'll shut up. Start with you. Practice time, talk, and touch. Keep those little foxes out of your love vineyard. Catch them, remove them, talk a lot, share a lot. Put those three loves together. Eros, agape, and phileo. Be a friend, be an unconditional lover, and be an erotic lover with your spouse. Little foxes. Guys, we've got to get rid of them. Because I'll tell you what, if we don't, then this goes out. Then we're left